two sides to it, really, haven't you? Is that a fair sort of summary? Take us through the therapy side, and then we'll sort of talk about the actual training and development side as well.
Sure. Yeah. So there's absolutely, as you mentioned, there's two sides, and both are experiencing incredible amounts of growth because of COVID-19. So the side on the therapy side is we're a clinic which is entirely online. We hire the therapist all around Australia. In theory, we can have therapists that are Australian trained and registered but are living overseas. And that will be a huge benefit to us because of time zones, being able to provide therapy after hours. And then we find clients who are usually families, but we have adults and children all around Australia that are requiring the service, but typically have to wait too long to get it. Match them together, the therapy happens online. We use existing software to do so. The second side is really about building up the sector and their ability to provide therapy online, particularly rural practices. We ran a summit about 2 months ago now, where we had over 500 people attend to help them to transition from doing face-to-face therapy to online. And we got a lot of really good feedback from that, including from some people who said their businesses were close to bust until they attended that summit, and then were able to learn how to then convert to online practice. So both of these things exist because of our need really to make sure that people in rural communities don't miss out, but also to build their capacity to do it themselves. I think they both work really well together. There's a real risk of us being an online clinic like everybody else, having most of our therapists that are based in cities, having most of the clients that are based in rural communities. And that just further increases the inequality between rural and urban. And our goal is absolutely not to do that, but to make sure that these rural communities are upskilled and have the resources remain there.
So the decision was made that you would actually deliver that completely online for all those reasons, that sort of background, the history, being able to deal with the reach as well. What's that been like to provide healthcare online? What would you say would be let's start with the differences between not doing it online versus doing it online?
Yeah, it's a good question. I mean, you can imagine that prior to COVID-19, there was so much resistance to moving online. And interestingly enough, a lot of the research suggests that this resistance comes from practitioners more than it comes from clients. Of course, because of COVID-19, we've had to transition online very quickly. So the differences really are, of course, that you can expand your reach so much further because your clinicians don't have to be in the same place as the clients. And when we talk about regional Australia, people sort of just say, well, we don't have enough clinicians. It's not as simple as that. There are actually clinicians around. It's just that they're not given the opportunities to work online or from their home or when and where they want. And coming back to that point around empathy and compassion, that doesn't just apply to us, to the clients, as in the families. It also applies to the clinicians. So to use a specific example, one or two of our therapists have particular conditions like medical conditions and disabilities where they're far better off working from home. Because we're able to provide these opportunities for them to work from home in places that they're comfortable, sometimes even lying down, we can unlock this market of clinicians who can work, and therefore we can increase the supply of the clinicians and connect them to our families. And to me, this is really important, that we apply this model of empathy and compassion, not just to the families, that is important, but to all the different stakeholders, particularly to the clinicians as well, by giving them the right types of opportunities.
There's so much to unpack in what you just said there. Firstly, the statistics are really quite staggering at the moment around the adoption rates for online healthcare. I'm not completely up to date with the stats, but as at 2 or 3 weeks ago, particularly in mental health care, there were 47% of all item numbers passed through Medicare that week were done using online modality. So that's an incredible adoption rate. And anecdotally, I'd tend to agree with the research that you were referencing there around the resistance around adopting telehealth as well, coming more from the practitioner side than from Australian consumers or people who are in need. And very recently, I've also heard from the Australian Institute of Health and Wellness that there's still a lot of people who need healthcare, but the conventional model of delivering healthcare is a barrier. So they're looking for alternative ways to be able to gain access to healthcare. So these are kind of stats, and there's still a little bit data. We're talking, some of these stats, as only as recent, unfortunately, as 2016 onwards. So we're going to see, I guess, some more information coming out, more up to date in terms of the 18, 19, and now the 20 experience. But what have you found? Do you think it's a certain type of healthcare practitioner that can embrace the online healthcare model? Do you think, do you think it can be trained? Is it a mindset? What are you sort of looking for when you're trying to guide and help people train, potentially even recruit people within UMBO?
For sure. With recruitment, there's not really a lot that we can look at in terms of experience of telehealth, because if we limit it just to that, we'd be talking about a select few. We really recruit on the basis of mindset. It's funny you mentioned that word, and also values to see whether or not the person is capable of transitioning to do their work online. We probably had some assumptions about the type of therapist that we'd have to come work with us. And interestingly enough, some of those assumptions have been blown out of the water. So one of the assumptions you might have is that the therapist is probably going to be younger because it involves a fair bit of technology, and you would assume that younger people are more comfortable with technology. Actually, quite a number of our therapists are later stage in their career. I won't dob on them by telling you their ages, but they're certainly towards the tail end of their careers. And the reason why they're coming to us, I think, is because of this notion that they still have a lot to offer, but they don't necessarily have the drive and desire to slog it out at their own practices. They want to fit in a little bit of therapy here and there. A really good example would be the kind of therapist who, let's talk about a younger one who maybe has young kids. She might drop the kids off at school, do a couple of hours of work in the morning, have an appointment in the afternoon, pick up the kids, feed them obviously, and then put them to bed and do a couple more hours afterwards. And often when therapists come to us, they ask us, how many hours do you expect me to work as a typical kind of job? And our answer usually is, well, you tell us. Because our whole theory of change is predicated on that idea that if we give people the opportunity to work when and where they want, the hours they want, being really flexible about it, we will unlock this job market that is there, but is potentially a little bit dormant. And therefore, that issue about the supply of therapists isn't an issue anymore. In terms of the types of therapists that would be ideal, it is mostly about mindset, I think. There's a wonderful book called The Entrepreneurial Clinician, which is written by Jo Muirhead, who actually is my coach. And she talks about, as clinicians, how we are taught a certain set of skills and values that are really at odds with what it takes to be an entrepreneur. We're not taught to take risks. We're not taught to do things unless it's perfect. We're not taught to do things unless there's evidence. But to be entrepreneurial, to have that spirit of entrepreneurism, is to actually do all these things, which are very much at loggerheads with what we're taught at uni. Those clinicians do definitely exist, though, and we're gradually bringing them on board.